Okay, welcome back. We're going to welcome back Coach Rodriguez. He's the offensive line coach at Akron. He's been gracious enough to come back on from his vacation from Mexico, which I'm looking into for my honeymoon. So you'll have to tell me if it's worth it or not. Coach,
Well
welcome
worth
back.
it. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys. And I would say, I can't, I'm by no means an expert on Mexico travel, but we did the Riviera Maya for a couple of days. We stayed in Akumal, which is like kind of smack in between Tulum and Cancun, and it was amazing. So I would highly recommend it for honeymoon.
Well, you can get a roast me here. I am getting married in the fall in September, so
Oof.
you can roast me for that one.
I'm sure you're getting enough from your colleagues. So I'll spare you.
It was an argument I wasn't going to win, so it was a 2 month argument. Her family is traveling from Ireland, and to travel in September is only $500 round trip. So
Mm.
yeah, I've
Happy
got.
wife, happy life, brother.
Well, that's the thing. It's been mixed. It's either I get roasted for a week straight or a month straight, whatever it is, or I've had coaches say, "Hey, there's many more football games to coach. One of them isn't going to kill you." And I'm like, "Yeah, you say that until we lose, and then I'm the one blamed for it or something because I wasn't there."
Yeah,
Or something. But you're right. Happy wife, happy life. Um,
absolutely.
So you just wrapped up your first season there at Akron. Not the first time coaching with Coach Moorhead, but it was your first time at Akron.
Mhm.
I tried to keep up with you guys this season. There was a little bumps, but how do you feel going into year two from the first season?
Yeah. I mean, positive, really, really kind of really looking at kind of excited about the future and kind of where we're going and what we're building and what we built already. Um, so I didn't realize this until Coach Moore had brought it up towards the end of the season in a staff meeting. Um, when you in hindsight, when you look back at what we inherited at Akron prior to us getting there, and it's not a knock on the current players or the ones that we inherited or the last staff that was there. Just it's numbers don't lie. It's a fact, right? It was probably, if not the one of the worst Division One programs
Hmm.
um, in the country in terms of wins and losses, margin of victory or marginal loss, really. But the one that kind of stands out the most is, everyone talks about the MAC being such a competitive conference and every game being essentially a toss up. And it's funny because you look at it and literally, and I think I kind of mentioned this a little bit before last summer when we talked. Like every year in each division of the conference, there's a worse first story. Right? Like Ohio U won our division last year and won the bowl game. They were 10-3. They were 3-9 the year prior.
Yep.
NIU won the whole league, 2 years ago, and they were over the year before that. And literally every year you go back to the last 5 or 6 years, and there's one of those stories. But in the midst of all that, over the last 3 from 2019 until 2021, prior to us getting there, um, the average score of a MAC game that Akron played in was a 17-42 loss. So in a conference that is, kind of known for parity and competitiveness, they were non competitive. So, really what we realized was we had to figure out a way to make our program and our team competitive and have a chance and do things to give ourselves a chance to look up in the fourth quarter and either have a lead or be within a score. And we talked to our guys about like, hey, listen, if we do these things, right? If you practice well, you meet well, hit all the checkpoints on the road, throughout the course of the week, you'll look up in the fourth quarter and you'll be, have a chance to make a play and win a game and whatnot. And I think we kept on saying it to the guys, and until they went through it 4 or 5 times, they almost were shocked at times that wow, like we're in a one-score game where we have a lead in the fourth quarter. So 2-10 is by no means we got it figured out. I do think we were playing our best ball the last month or so of the season. We went to NIU, which at the time was a defending conference champs. Akron had not won a game there, I think, in almost 20 years, and we go there and beat them by, a pretty convincing margin. I think it was like by 20 plus points or whatnot. We go to we lost 5 conference games by 7 points or less that last probably 6 games of the season. And I think we had to lead in 4 of those games. And you can literally check off a bingo card of how many of ways to lose a game that we lost them, right? Like we had a 4 point lead, I think it was, to at home to Bowling Green, fourth quarter, kind of just trying to ice the game. We force them to punt. They try to pin us back in deep. True freshman punt returner backs up to the 2 yard line, which of course, you tell them, hey, heels at 5 and don't back up for any reason. Poor kid, try to make a play, backs up, muffs the punt. They recover it, they score, and they win by 3. And also earlier in the game, we had a pick 6 and, whatever. You go to Buffalo, last game of the year. They're fighting for bowl contention. We're just trying to, keep momentum. We have I forget what the score was, but we missed 2 field goals that would have made it a 3-score game or 2-score game or whatever it was. We forced a turnover with like 3.5 minutes to go in the game. They're essentially out of timeouts. We had a chance to run the clock out and win the game. We fumbled the first handoff on possession and 10 on an inside zone play where there's not even a read element to it. And they recover, and of course, and then they go around and score, and win the game by 1. We blew a 6 point lead in the fourth quarter to our rival Kent State and lost by 6. We missed a few field goals in that game too. We fumbled the game-winning touchdown, and which got recovered for a touchdown the other way against Central Michigan. We dropped the game-winning touchdown, wide open wheel route against Eastern Michigan, which is the team that won 9 games last year. So like we put ourselves in a position to do that, which is in hindsight was a positive step forward. Right, we were way more competitive. But the reason why I say it's exciting and we're looking forward to it is because we bring back a really, really good core of players on both sides of the ball that I think have kind of worked their way through some of the issues of how to win or lose close games, right? You have a group of guys, whether there were guys we inherited who hadn't been through close games because they just weren't in those scenarios before, or guys who transferred into us from other schools that maybe weren't playing as much in those scenarios. So you really had a whole team of guys that were trying to figure out, how to win a game in the fourth quarter or how to not lose a game in the fourth quarter. And I think we've kind of worked our way through some of those growing pains. A lot of those guys are back. We have also added some pieces of some guys that we think are going to help us out and be a little more decisive in those situations. It's year 2 in the system. We didn't change offenses. We didn't change defenses. We had very little coaching turnover in our staff. We just lost 1 full-time coach in the whole staff. So, all those things you would think, had a great off season, had a great spring. So all signs point to an exciting, next step forward for the program. Now, what is that? Is that, for us, we think it's, closing out some of those games where you have the lead or you have a chance in the fourth quarter, not being surprised by the gravity of the moment, right? And that should lead to, you mentioned 5 or 6 games by 7 to 8 points. You flip 3 or 4 of those, and now you're fighting for bowl contention. In November, which is really what this program should be aspiring to. To play, have a chance to go play in Detroit for a conference championship, and have a chance to go, be rewarded at the end of the season by playing at one of these full bowl slots.
Well, I was going to say I was trying to keep tabs this year on everybody I've talked to, and I saw that where it was close games. And it was more like you guys beat yourselves. So that's a positive. Like, hey, we take care of business on a couple of things we can control. You win the game.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're fighting for this.
Absolutely. And that's been one of the big themes. Kind of maybe the 2 biggest themes for the whole offseason is, number 1, finish, right? Mm-hmm. And that's such a cliche term. What does it mean? And for guys that follow us on social media or you see a lot of like graphics being posted and hashtags and captions with 212, right? 212 degrees. And that goes back to that, that book, that was written years ago, about the extra degree, right? Where at 211 degrees while it's hot, at 212, it produces steam and you can power locomotive, you can change the world, right? And what can each of us do as a coaching staff member, a player, support staff member, an administrator, whatever it is, like what is your individual extra degree, and how we combine all those together. To your point, can we flip some of those close losses to close wins? And the other big component or theme throughout the offseason has been, become hard to beat.
Mhm.
Right? You look back at so many of the, one key thing that every coach talks about it, and unfortunately it's true, is turnover margin. We were the worst in the conference, I think, last year in turnover margin. We turned the ball over way too often in offense, and we didn't create enough, on defense. We did a lot better. As again, we were better in both of those categories as the year went on. We played our best ball towards the end of the year. There's no surprise to that, right?
Mhm.
But we got to do a better job of keeping possession of the football and of gaining extra possessions on defense. And that's part of being hard to beat, right? And how do you train that? Well, when you're in the off season and you're doing your winter conditioning stuff, how much detail can you layer into those drills, right? How much detail can you layer into your accountability stuff with your players? Because that's all part of becoming hard to beat. There's a lot more, that is a lot more games are lost than are won in high
Yes.
school football and college football, even the NFL. So,
Right. And another good point you brought up, if you look at all the teams in the MAC, if the coaching staff stays, they do pretty well. Like you look at Ohio, those coaches don't leave.
yeah.
Kent State for a while, they didn't leave till just recently. Toledo
Mm-hmm.
and all them. If there's no turnover, they seem to do well because things start to, like you said, at the second half of the season when they first get there, then it just rolls. But then you never know. NIU was really good last year, and then they struggled this year.
Yeah.
So it just kind of, if you guys stay together, I was thinking, I was looking at all the teams. I'm like, yeah, those coaching staffs don't leave. And if they don't leave, they do very well, like year in and year out.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you have a good plan and you're consistent with it, right, and you stay true, I think number one, you can recruit to it, which is a big thing. Number two, I think your current players, there is a certain level of comfort, right? Like they know, how you're going to react, and when you're down by two scores, and they know how you're going to react when you're up by, So there's not like there was so much, and you forget about it. So there's always a feeling out process year one, right? It is what it is. But it's even more so when the team that's taken over has struggled as much as they have here in the past.
Mhm.
Because like literally, not only are they learning you and your reactions, they're literally learning what it's like to be
Yeah.
in a close game, right? And,
Right.
and I mean, even our first one of the season, which was the opener against St. Francis, which is a really, really good FCS team that went to overtime, that quite frankly we probably should have lost. And I remember, I think at halftime we were either up by three or down by. I mean, it was a close game the whole game. No one pulled away. And I think our kids thought, well, they're an FCS team, and they're not even a fully funded FCS team. We're going to draw over them. And that wasn't the case. And they were really well coached and played really, really hard, had good players. And a bunch of other guys transferred to Power 5 programs at the end of the season. But my point is, I remember walking in the locker room at halftime after we had our coaches meeting and talking to my players and saying, hey, guys, like, this is a fist fight in a phone booth. And
Mhm.
this is what college football is. Like, college football, like, you watch Alabama play against, I don't know, Morehouse College or something, whatever, and beat them by 70 points. That's the exception, not the rule. Most of college football, for those of us who don't coach at those places, it's grinding out wins and taking pride in that, taking pride in being hard to beat, taking pride in finding a way to make a play or not make a play or whatever it is to win those close games. It's a lot
Mhm.
more like the NFL than it is like the SEC versus an FCS program. And you got to keep on hammering that. And eventually, I think our guys, kind of understood that. I think, towards the end of the year, like they were not surprised when, we had some success this quarter and got up early. And they also weren't, I think, shook as much when the team answered back and tied it up, particularly in the fourth quarter, So you just got to have that kind of puncher's mentality, like next play, next play, next play, because that you have a chance to go win that play.
Right. Because another cliche type of thing people talk about is culture, and and I could be wrong. I thought of it in COVID. COVID, I was big on culture. Like, what is culture? And then this off season, I'm like, what does culture even mean? And it's like the standard. So what's your standard? And you've hinted at it like, hey, we're going to be tough. We're going to be mentally tough. We're going to be good people, which turns into we're going to compete. It all turns into wins. People talk about culture, culture. Well, we all say the same thing. Then it's how do you act upon it and coaches. And so like if you guys aren't shook, they're not going to be shook. Like this is the standard. Like this is who we are. Like you said, the 2-7 is not, or whatever the record was, is not the standard. And if they
Mm-hmm.
understand that, then it's going to turn into, hey, that's not the standard. And we're going to tell the guys that recruit come in, hey, this isn't who we are. Like this is what we want to be. And so if they should see positive signs, and it should turn into wins, that's what I've been studying all off season is what is culture? What is this? How do you do this? And if you keep it the consistency, like the Alabamas of the world and all that stuff, it turns into that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's one of the I think to your point, it's such a quote unquote buzz term or buzzword, and it's such an in a lot of situations, it's such an empty word because
Yep.
people can kind of morph it, say whatever they want to say or how they want to say. I think it's really easy to say, our culture is this, or we stand for this, or we're going to build a culture of, whatever. Everybody wants the same thing, right? Toughness,
Right.
mental and physical toughness, right? Perseverance, being good teammates, being responsible, everyone, graduating and doing well academically, all those type of things. Um, but because here's the thing, like, especially when you're managing, I don't care whether it's a high school team of 25 guys and at our level, a college team of 110 guys, and actually, like, situations are going to come up almost daily
Uh-huh.
that are going to challenge your culture, right? And not even necessarily by the kids being, um, you know, um, like divisive, right? Just like they're kids, like they're going to skip a class, they're going to oversleep an alarm, they're going to miss, a train failure, they're going to miss or whatever. Right? They're going to get in trouble academically. They're going to get in trouble in the community sometimes, with alcohol or something or whatever.
Right.
And how if you say, hey, our culture is this, that, and the other, and then if you don't act that way when that situation comes up because of who the player is, because you recruited him or because his dad or whatever the hell it is, he's a good player as opposed to a bad player, scholarship as opposed to walk on, whatever. I think that erodes away, at what you're trying to do. So I think number one, and I think Coach Moore does a great job of this. I think it'd be very very clear, um, with the expectations,
Uh-huh.
very very clear with what are your non-negotiables, right? And quite frankly, let's be honest, I think you got to be careful sometimes with what your non-negotiables are because you don't want to put yourself in a corner where okay I got to kick my best player off the team because he missed a class, right? Like that's going to happen, and that's
Right.
probably like that. Like it's kind of like the American court system. Like the punishment should somehow fit the crime. Right? And I mean, like
Uh-huh.
let's not overreact for a small minor offense, right? Now, like we have non-negotiables in our program, and they're pretty. I would imagine they're pretty standard across the board for other programs. No gun violence. No violence against females. No habitual illegal drug use. No stealing from teammates. If you do one of those four things, there's really not a whole lot of conversation to be had. If you're the kind of person we want to have in our program. And I think if we polled all 110 guys and say, hey, listen, player X, was caught stealing from someone else's locker,
Uh-huh.
or was caught, beating up his girlfriend or someone or whatever. I think that most people, both in the program and outside, would say that's probably a person you don't want in our program. But if it's a guy that is misses a class or is late for a workout or something, yeah, that has to be punished and has to be dealt with immediately, but probably not with the same consequences as some of those non-negotiables.
Right.
But you also can't, super under the rug and act like it didn't happen because it needs to be consistent. And it needs to be consistent whether it's the starting quarterback or the fourth string center. That's where I think a lot of coaches sometimes at all levels, and I've seen it in the NFL and I've seen it in high schools too. I think sometimes they kind of look at the player first and then the action second. And you should be able to have the same reaction to every action, and almost take the player out of it, I think.
Right. Because I've been a part of that where when I was a 25-year-old OC and I thought I knew everything, um, our running back was like talking back to the running backs coach. Running backs coach is like, "Do I have permission to kick him out of practice?" Talk him back to this. I was like, "Yeah, do it." So he did. Head coach comes in and says, "Well, we believe in second chances. He could still start." And I was like, "No, because you're going to show the kids they could just yell at the coach and do whatever. And if they get kicked out of practice, nothing happens." And I looked
Mm-hmm.
at him. I said, "He will not play offense. Like that's not what we need to do." So he sat the first quarter, and all of a sudden he was on defense, and they were saying, "Hey, put him on offense." I was like, "No, I don't even want him on defense." And I told the head coach who was brand new, I was like, that needs to be the standard right there. I was 25 years old, telling him like, no, like you're going to show these kids that they can do what they want, and that's not what it is. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to reward them for something. And then fast forward to 2018, I'm at a different school. A coach told me, he goes, "Hey, I was building up this team a couple years ago. We were 4-4. If we won one more game, we're going to make the playoffs the first time since 1999." And he's told them, he said, "The rule is you miss the bus to an away game and your parent drops you off, you don't play because you missed the bus." Starting quarterback missed the bus. So he looked at the quarterback and said, "You're not playing." They lost. And he's like, "I'm not sacrificing me for that." And fast forward, people don't miss the bus now. Now he's got it rolling. Now they win 8 games a year. They go
Yeah.
8-1 every year. But he's like, "I'm not sacrificing it." And so I just compared the two coaches and I'm like, I worked for this guy in 2018. And I'm like, that's what he has. And now he gets 65 kids on his varsity team alone now. So he's got it built
Mm-hmm.
up because he never sacrificed. Now, like you said, there's wiggle room each year. You got to adjust a little bit, especially with the times, like how we're doing things. But he's like, I don't wiggle room on certain things. And now they know what we expect. And then they start telling freshmen or new kids, "Hey, this is what we do." And then they start to buy into it, and then it just rolls. Now they're winning
Absolutely.
conference. They're winning conference almost every year. They get to the
Yeah.
playoffs, and now that's the standard. Now it used to be we don't make the playoffs. It's been since 1999. Now the
Mm-hmm.
standard is since 2018 we compete for the conference and we compete to try to win a playoff game.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the point you made about, well, now the seniors or the older guys are talking to the freshmen or you guys about it. I think that's what we're all at the end of the day trying to get to in terms of our culture is where number one, your current players are the keepers of the culture, but more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, more importantly they're the transmitters of culture. And that's honestly why, like, I mean, I don't want to say this is my favorite time of year. Well, we're on vacation, so it kind of is. But it's my favorite time of year in terms of that part of the culture
Uh-huh.
because we're not there. And even in the early part of the summer in June, when we are on campus most days, we're not like in the weight room with the players, right? We're not,
Mm-hmm.
we're on the field with them or in the meeting room with them for like less than 2 hours a week or whatever it is. So they get to spend so much more time with just themselves and maybe the strength coaches. And then also, like for example, like in my room, we have 15 kids who are in our room right now. Four of them are new transfers,
Uh-huh.
and then we have two new scholarship freshmen and two new PWO freshmen who will be joining us in the next month or two. So like I'm not back on campus until July like 15th. Our
Uh-huh.
freshmen, our non-mid-year freshmen are moving in on Sunday. Um, so our upperclassmen are going to be solely, I don't say solely, but heavily in charge of making sure those guys know where the meetings are, the meeting room is for the first team meeting, making sure those guys
Uh-huh.
know, how to, dress for the workouts, making sure they know, you know, where the train table is for dinner and lunch and that kind of stuff. And I love that. Not because I'm lazy and I don't want to do it, because to me, that's them now, transmitting culture. So before I ever meet with our freshmen formally and explain to them kind of, hey, this is what we do. This is what your level of expectation is, which I will do when I get back in town. Literally, they'll just be nod their heads and say, "Yes, coach, we know," because the 3, 4, 5 older guys we have who have been kind of deemed as leaders, they've already told us already. And more importantly, we've watched them do it,
Mhm.
watch how they carry themselves, and we're just doing what they do. And I think that's like the holy grail, right? That we're all trying to get to in terms of our culture and our teams. It's hard because, especially in this era of college football with the transfer portal, I mean, hell, you have less and less and less older guys, or at least older guys who you've cultivated, right? If
Mhm.
you have grad transfers and stuff. Um, so that's becoming harder and harder and harder to accomplish.
Yeah, that kind of leads into two different thoughts. Like, I know for me, like when I meet with the O lineman, I still set what the head coach wants. So if this is his rules, this is what he wants, this is what he does, then I kind of have my own as long as I don't overstep his. And so, like with your group, do you still have like your thing? Like, hey, we have the standards of the head coach and the program, but then here's mine on top of it. Because that's what I do. I'm like, this is I say certain things to them, and I'm like, this is what I expect out of you. This is his thing. Now here's mine on top of that, right? Like if I walk through school, this is how you act. Because I'm different. I can walk through school and see what they're doing. Or
Mm-hmm.
like, this is how you talk to me. This is how you do this. When we're on the practice field, this is what you do. When we break down after a drill, this is what we say. Do you do that in your room? Like you have your own personal touch to it with like a not culture, I guess, but whatever is built there.
Oh yeah, 100%, absolutely. And I think you have to, right? Because ultimately you are the head coach of your position,
Right.
and you're responsible for not only their performance on the field, but also their performance in every walk of being a student athlete. So you better put your own touch on it now, but it also has to jive very well and mesh very well with what the head coach's vision of what the culture is and what he wants to get done. So yes, we absolutely have a set of standards and a set of expectations and a culture, if you will, that we try to cultivate in our room that's maybe somewhat different and unique to us than other groups, but it has to and it always will kind of fall in line with what the head coach wants. It'll never be counter to what the head coach wants, right? So head coach, he's going to emphasize preparation, effort, execution, right? On game day to practice. Well, obviously, we're not going to de-emphasize those things, but we're going to. To me, I think as a assistant coach, your job is to kind of, in terms of this context, your job is to kind of drill down, right, and unpack a little bit of to what does the head coach mean when he says this, and then make it palatable to your players. Because the head coach delivers a message that has to be somewhat palatable to 110, sets of ears,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when he gets up in the very first team meeting that we have before training camp starts, when the whole team is together for the first time, um, he's gonna lay out, certain levels of expectation and codes of behavior, and so on, so on, and so forth. And number one, certain guys just have a hard time dialing in and focusing when they're in a group of 110, a team meeting, right? You know what I mean? So you're automatically going to lose some of that message anyways, just because of the setting, right? You know what I mean? And then obviously as an assistant coach, you meet with your guys daily. Whereas a head coach only has maybe 2 or 3 team meetings a week, so maybe their learning styles way better than the head coach does, right?
Right.
And also the demands of your position and how you're going to coach it more than he does. So you let him do his thing, and then like every time, I would say almost every time we have a team meeting, it's not on a practice day or something. It's not a football related meeting. I'll keep my guys afterwards and try and kind of unpack a little bit and drill down. Like for example, like we had a team meeting at the spring practice. Hey, spring practice is over. Here's the calendar going forward. Right, we have your extra meetings this day. You guys are free to go home whenever finals are over. Here's the first day. Here's our first your return date. Our first team meeting is this day. Yada yada yada. Right, you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you get these 3 or 4 book return, check in with your advisor, whatever, before you get done. Um, that's all on a PowerPoint, slide. in a team meeting for everyone to see. But again, there's 110 guys that there's some guys taking notes, some guys are kind of like, space, starting off in space counting sheep or whatever, So I got to kind of drill that back in. And there's certain guys I know I got to call on them. Hey,
Mhm.
what the return, and so again, because you don't want to ever assume, because then, again, you're the head coach of your position. Then, 2 months later, a month later, it's time for the first team meeting, and certain guy booked the flight the day after, the day before, or whatever. So I guess short answer to your question is 100% yes. We have additional, I guess, or what's additional, more detailed, I
Mhm.
think, sets of culture standards in our room, but I hope at least they're completely in line with Coach Moorhead's.
Well, and the offensive line room is the most fun, in my opinion. It's the best room. I've been in quarterback rooms. I sit there and listen. I sit to wide receivers, and I'm like, the offensive line room is the best. We have our own language. We have our own way of doing things. We have our own whatever. It's the best. And the head coach will come in and sit in offensive line meetings, and he'll go tell everybody, "Hey, you should go sit in Coach Steve's room because he's all over the place. He's joking around. They're having fun. They know what it's the best. Like it's
It
I don't
really
know,
is. It really is. And you generally don't deal with a lot of ego in the room, which is
right.
great because everyone can kind of laugh at themselves, and it's okay to do that, right? Because as big guys, we kind of all learn it's kind of almost a defense mechanism sometimes, right? So you learn that you learn so much. Like for example, one big thing that we're a little bit different on than probably other groups for sure in our building, maybe in other buildings, is that. So, for example, let's say that we have a player who's a young guy who's
Mhm.
just kind of having a hard time with his off the field accountability things. And again, that could be something small like just going to study hall or getting
Mhm.
his homework turned in on time or making it on time to mandatory treatments or meals or workouts or whatever. Um, you know, if it's an isolated incident, if it's a once in a, everyone's going to screw up sometimes, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
So we don't overreact to that. We don't punish the whole group for that. We'll take action on that one individual, and he'll pay an immediate quick price, but he'll get over it. But when it becomes a habitual issue, now that affects the whole group. Why? Because, well, especially if it's a guy, because let's face it, like I think football in general is the greatest team sport in all there is because it's so intertwined. But I think the offensive line probably lives that more than any other position on the field, right? You know what I mean? Like there's five of us out there, and if from the right guard to left tackle are all going the right way, doing the right thing, if the right tackle is doing his own thing, then we're screwed, right? It's a sack. It doesn't matter what happens. And but I can say well the right tackle is, I can say well the O line stinks, right?
Right.
And that kind of stuff. So if it becomes an issue where it's habitual or it's becoming a distraction, we will all pay the punishment
Mhm.
and all have the discipline of the one who screwed up.
Right.
And that could be frustrating at times, and guys get angry, and I get it, and it's almost done for that reason because like I would hope to God, and I've done this at other schools and other places, and it's worked out for the most part. Um, some guys have a hard time being self motivated,
Mhm.
right? Some guys have a hard time being self regulated, and that's okay, especially when you're a younger guy because it's not natural.
Right.
Um, but when you see a direct and immediate impact on your actions or lack thereof, your choices or lack thereof, your judgment or lack thereof, on all your buddies, and they didn't do a damn thing wrong, and they're all
Right.
being punished. Right? That happens on the field every single play, but it's just not magnified as it is when everyone's doing up downs, everyone's up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday because you couldn't get up and go to class, you couldn't go eat a free meal, or you could whatever. Um, so there is a little bit of positive peer pressure, uh, probably more so in our group than others because this is how we're wired because we're
Mhm.
so interdependent on each other for our success, right? Um, so yeah, that's probably one thing that we're a little bit different on than some other groups.
Yeah, and then I don't know about I was gonna say like Is there anything in this first year where you guys came in like we have to change this, or maybe we couldn't do this? Like for me, I realized I beat these old linemen into the ground last year. I was so like, we have to get people off the ball. So we're hitting a lot. We're hitting a lot. We're hitting a lot. Then I thought back on, I was like, we're probably exhausted when it comes to game time. Like we're just
Mhm.
killing them. So this year I sat them all down and I said, part of our room is we have to strive to be perfect. So I'm going to make things streamlined, not simplified, streamlined. I'm going to make it where we can do it, hold each other accountable. You're not going to get as many reps because I'm not going to kill you. But guess what? You better strive to do it perfect and you have to be more hyper focused now. Like, and don't be afraid to make a mistake and we're going to move. And that's one thing I changed. Like the old school way I have to get out of my mind. I'll like for some things, there's some things I won't be not old school. Like you said, you screw up. Yeah, you see that track over there? We're gonna go to the track and we're gonna get you right or something. But when it comes to like, I want all this time, I'm gonna hit all the time, I can't do it. I
Yeah,
think back to when I was playing, like that just killed me. And I'm like, I am killing these kids. Like we got to be fresh. We got to be ready to go. We got to be mentally ready to go, especially as old linemen, because mentally we got to think within those couple seconds. And so that's one thing I changed about myself. And so I'm asking coaches, like, have you ever found yourself changing like that? Like changing with the times is what I call it.
yeah, absolutely. I don't think that I had the same experience, or I've had the same experience. Well, at least not recently, because I think college football is so much more regulated now,
Mhm.
with how much you can hit, when you can hit, how much you can pad them up, and that kind of stuff. So, um, I don't think that we like like that component of it. I don't think was something that we probably said we're going to change or whatnot. Um, what I do think, so for example, I think in general, young people now and kids, the age that we coach them, they're
Mhm.
much they're much better visual learners now
Mhm.
than they were, or I should say, there's more visual learning now than there was, maybe 10 years ago, right? Because everything's now, has some kind of a digital component to it. So, for example, when we're installing a game plan, hey, listen, guys, like, we're going to carry, split zone. We're going to carry, GT counter. We're going to carry one back power, and we're going to carry, pin and pull, whatever, into this game plan. Um, when you say those words, that can paint a picture. Yeah, we get it, whatnot. It's how we can react to it. And in the past, I would just say, "Hey guys, these are the formations we're carrying. These are the runs we're carrying out of these formations." And I would have a kind of a quick cut up of uh, like, like a quick intro cut up of the opponent on for Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon. Um, what I did a little bit more so the last probably quarter of the season, which I think had more success with us having better practices on, because Tuesdays are hard because they've been off for 3 or 4 days from actually playing, right? Because you play Saturday,
Mhm.
Sunday you might practice, you might not, but even if you do, it's going to be a very very light, non-padded, glorified walkthrough pretty much. Then they're off on Monday, and they're off all day Tuesday morning too. They have class and study holiday, so they don't really get back into true like competitive football mode after the game on Sunday till Tuesday afternoon, right? And then you come in Tuesday afternoon and you have an hour and 10-minute meeting to kind of introduce the opponent, what they do, how they do it, who the good players are, and how we're going to try to attack them on first and second down. Um, so all that dozen of information, and there's always some wrinkles, on Tuesday, everything, each game plan. So you're trying to visualize that, kind of digest it, and then go out there and practice at full speed and full pads. Because usually Tuesdays are your only full padded day of the whole week, and it's your only legitimate first, second down game plan day. Because Wednesday's more situations, and Thursday's more of a wrap up.
Mhm.
So what we did towards the last quarter of the season, which I thought was really good, was I would always make like play cut ups. Like, hey, this is how this team defends inside zone, split zone, fan schemes, wide zone, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but I started kind of cherry picking those cut ups into our like intro cut up. And now when I say, hey, this team's a back cap team on split zone, like they could actually see them backpacking. Hey, this team spills on counter more than they box. Let's show them a couple. Let's show them two, three examples of that more. So
Uh-huh.
you, it forces you to be a little bit more concise with your beginning part of your meeting. Hey, like this is what they do and everything. So I spend probably less time now than I did before on the opponent overall, like generic intro.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had a GA last year who's at Notre Dame now, Rob Delaney, who had known me for 2 years, and he made a really concise, like 1 page kind of sheet graph type thing that had all the current information on there. Like, hey, they're the percent, and for us, we don't even need to know if they're over, under, if they're whatever. It's are they four down or are they odd, right?
Uh-huh.
What are those percentages? What's the breakdown of pressure, no pressure, right? And what's the breakdown of movement, right? That's it. That's all we really care about, right? Like how much are we seeing it's four down and three down? How much movement and pressure are we seeing? And and that's what you spend on first, second down. So again, spending less time on kind of your quote unquote scatter report BS stuff and more time on what are we seeing, what do we expect that how they're gonna play and react to defend what we're gonna run, and show them like moving pictures of that.
Right.
So that's one thing that I'm definitely gonna kind of lean in more so on going forward, because I just think that guys should learn better that way. You know what I mean? To sit there and say, especially for us in our offense, like we're no huddle, we're not warp speed, but we go pretty fast.
Right.
Like our guys don't even know formations, nor should they know formations. Like they don't know if we're in 2x2 or 3x1, or we're in, trips to the field or not, or no tight end. They don't even know that. There's no way for them to know that. So to spend time talking about how they defend 2x2 as opposed to 3x1, that doesn't really affect their daily life very much.
Right.
So let's spend more time on what they need to know concisely to go and execute a game plan at a high level.
Right. And I don't know if you see that at the college level, but for high school anyway, there's more questioning of things. And so I find myself, I was telling a coach yesterday I'm getting the podcast ranked back up. So I'm getting people like I have 3 today and 3 tomorrow. I'm
Oh, nice.
talking to coaches all over. And
Yeah,
I told a coach, I was like, I found myself a couple years ago, and as soon as I show something, I immediately say why or like how it works because I'm
absolutely.
because years ago, like I said, I was 25, they questioned it, but you took it personal. You were like, "What do you mean you're
Mm-hmm.
questioning me?" Well,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it made me better actually with them at questioning it years ago. Now I say
Mm-hmm.
why because it helps me out, and then it helps if a freshman O line coach is sitting in there, they need to know why too. So if I immediately just say it, it makes me better because then I'm thinking and then they understand it right there. So I'm like, we're running inside zone. We're going to this guy because of this, or wide zone. The reason why we do this, the reason why I'm having you guys use these steps is because of this. And this is what it does without them even asking me. Like
Mm-hmm.
immediately, I don't know if you saw that at the college level, but at least for high school, they question it a lot. Then it just found all of us, we realized that we're like, oh, we immediately say why, like immediately.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. So there's that famous um, head talk from a couple years ago from Simon Sinek, right? That start with why, right?
Uh-huh.
It talks about why Apple, is so much more successful than company X, Y, or Z,
Uh-huh.
and it's because of their mission statement starts with why. And when I heard that, first of all, it made perfect sense, but second of all, it made me realize that I think I've been doing that my whole career, not because I'm some genius, whatever, because I'm not, but
Uh-huh.
because the, I look back at my career and my history as a player. Um, I was an overachiever that was I was above the line athletically, above the line, but not a whole lot above. I wasn't like a first round draft pick or anything, but I was able to play and have a good career in high school and college and the NFL because like I knew the system kind of in and out. Like and I was the one sitting in the front taking notes, asking, well, why are we doing that, not this, or why does this play come with that play, or why are we making this such a protection? And again, it was never to question the validity of the offense or the scheme. It was more so to understand it forwards and backwards because I felt like that was my my angle or my way to make sure I kept on playing.
Hmm.
So I think I probably approach coaching the guys the same way, right? Like, hey guys, like this week we're going to run more split zone than insert zone because of how they fit it, right?
Right.
And now that what that does do, and I'm going to go up on a tangent here. What that does do is that forces your players to understand a little more schematically, right? Like big picture, right? And you have some guys who, like for example, like we started a freshman left tackle for the last third of the season last year, right? True freshman. And a lot of what I said in the meeting room in terms of the whys and the hows, and that went over that kid's head. You know what I mean? He just wanted to know, coach, like, who do I block on this play? Like, which are we going? Like, what's my technique? Like, that's what I want. And even that was at times too much, which is fine because it's true freshman. I get it. You know what I mean? But if you keep on rehashing those things out and re-talking about them week in, week out, week in, week out, week in, week out, then hopefully by the time that kid gets to week 12 of his freshman year, now he's operating like a sophomore,
Hmm.
and by the time it's year 2, year 3, now he's thinking like a senior. And he can self-diagnose and get himself right. Like that to me, that's the best. Like we got to that point later on in the year this year where we come off the sidelines and hey, we got stuck on third and short. What happened, right? And I'm before I can even get an answer from the box, my junior right tackle was telling me, "Hey, coach, I took, I didn't take this footwork and I got beat inside."
Hmm.
That's on me, right? That A shows a lot of trust and maturity, but B shows that when they're self-diagnosing, you know, um, then they're speaking your language and they're thinking, in your terms, and that to me is where you want to be, as opposed to, hey, how did so and so beat you? I don't know, or he beat me inside. Like I need more than that, right? You know what I mean? And that's where we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and then I started to be more lenient, I guess, when it comes to technique. Like I coach technique. I tell them this is what I want. But like we just did it, we were doing like double teams the other day, and I'm filming it. Then we're in the meeting, and instead of maybe because like galloping, I want them to gallop. Instead of galloping, they
Mm-hmm.
just turn and ran. Now I tell them like, hey, what'd you do here? And they're like, well, I just turned and ran. But they had a good block, and I said, now I tell them this in a game. Will I accept that if we actually got like 3 yards out of it? Now the older guys are like, yes. The other kids are scared. They're like, no. And I'm like, no, I would, but realize that we keep having to strive to do this technique for a reason because maybe you got the block now, but we play a really good team or a team that's going to come in and try to combat that. They might beat you. A good defensive lineman's going to beat you if you don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be positive with them now because I came into this year saying I'm not going to get my heart rate up over like 130. Like it's just not going to happen. Um, and I said, I want you guys to not be afraid to make a mistake and then understand what the mistake was, see it, and then when I say these things to you, you understand. And I am finding slowly if they're not afraid to make a mistake and they're not going to like freak out or like get scared, quote unquote, or like Coach Steve's going to
Mm-hmm.
yell at me again, like then they start to take ownership of it. Then like we've been talking this whole time, then your experienced guys might be coaching them themselves. Like, hey,
Absolutely.
this and then you don't have to do it. You're like, hey, they
Yeah.
figured it out.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. So it's a to your point, it's a fine line, right? Like how, because obviously you want them to use your technique, or you said
Mhm.
your art technique, right? You know what I mean? And you want them to buy into it and see why they're doing it, right? So to your point, like that's like even from a technical standpoint, starting with why, hey, like this is why we gallop, on the backside of the inside zone as opposed to, opening and running, right? Because
Mhm.
of movement, because of, power, because of so on and so forth. Um, and I think so for example, like we had these 4 new transfers show up, in June, right? And we're going to count these guys to play for us. So we had to get them to speed really in about a month because I was leaving, we were on vacation in July, right?
Yeah.
So when we don't start teaching those guys plays and words because they're going to learn that shit anyways, but they need
Right.
to learn technique. It's almost like Legos, right? Like your technique are building blocks, and then you can kind of mismatch those anywhere you need to fit a gap scheme play or zone scheme play or wide zone play, whatever it is. So when we create these like installation tapes for technique, um, we have the technique name on the slide, how why we do it, how we drill it,
Mhm.
and then it actually starts with NFL guys or high level college guys doing it, the guys who are first round draft picks, whatever, other schools. So they can see, oh wow, like the Chiefs are using this technique and their guys are blocking guys. So obviously it works for them. It should work for me too. Or they're seeing, Rashawn Slater do it, out in San Diego, or they're seeing, whoever do it, right? Then it comes back to us doing it, right? In either scrimmage or practice or game film, so it's kind of like you see the best in the world doing it and you see yourself doing it and of course using the good clips, right? So they see that it's successful. Um, Now, probably one of the biggest things that I took away from my time in the NFL, um, and I kind of still kind of have this look at it the same way throughout my coaching career, is that your technique is your technique. And there
Huh.
are certain things, obviously, that you teach and you want to be, kind of quote unquote hallmarks of, like, when a coach watches, your team play. Oh yeah, they're coached by, a guy that believes in this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But the reality is that the expression of that technique through the bodies that you're coaching is going to look different in almost every single body, right? And I learned this in the NFL, but I also learned it coaching small, low level college football. My first full time job, I was coaching at Bryant, which at the time had just moved from D2 to FCS. And like my first or second year there, like we had two all conference guys. One was a center and one was a right tackle. Well, my right tackle was like a 6'7", 315 pound. Looked like he looked like a Boston College offensive lineman. Now he didn't move like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it took him 3 or 4 years to kind of get it to a point where he was able to function. My point is, like, he looked very different. That our technique expressed itself very differently through that body than it did through our 5'9", 275 pound off conference center.
Right.
Right? So to expect those two guys to move the same way and hit things with the same, kind of angles and whatnot just wasn't reality. Now, obviously, the size differences and the differences in athleticism are not as wide now, at the FBS level, but it's still at times pretty wide.
Mhm.
So your number one goal is the kid doing a job, right? Like,
Mhm.
did he block the right guy and stop him from getting to the ball carrier or the quarterback on the given play when you're grading it, right? That's the number one thing. Now, they use technique properly, proper technique, all those things, yes, yes, as well. But it's possible to have a positive performance play and have a negative technique play sometimes. Like it happens
Mhm.
sometimes. So you don't want to lose um, the the performance to get the technique better. I think sometimes. But that's always a struggle that I think every coach fights with in their head, right? Like, so how I try to sell to my guys is, hey guys, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that like it's impossible to make that block without this technique, because it is, right? What I'm telling you is that the technique that we're coaching you is going to probably help you do it the most consistently,
Right.
play in, play out, especially given all the variables you may see in front of you with movement, slant and angling, pressures, that kind of stuff. Um, and I think if they believe that, then they're going to try and do it.
Mhm.
Listen, I had a kid our first spring here who was a returning starter who literally could not, like, they hadn't coached Gallup at all, I guess, before he got here. And the kid, like, literally was physically incapable of galloping. We call it Gallup a gap drive.
Uh-huh.
Literally wasn't capable of like he would try and like take one, almost like fall over after one step. It was like the weirdest thing ever. Like, it became a joke in the room, actually. Like guys would bust his balls about it.
Right.
But you know what? To the kid's credit, he believed in the technique. He believed in the coaching. He worked at it on his own. Obviously, for the course of last summer, because we come back to training camp last year, and all of a sudden he's able to gallop and do so at a pretty high level, to the point where if you go back and look at our install tape for gap drive technique. He's on 3 or 4 of those clips actually.
Hmm.
Um, so obviously he bought in, and
Right.
he believed that was the way to do it best, I guess, because he wasn't like always necessarily not making the block, not using the technique, but not consistently, I guess.
Hmm.
So again, to me, like when you see those kind of examples, it shows you where I guess you're going the right direction.
Well, and then like you said earlier, not everybody's going to look the same, and that was a big problem
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger. Like we all have to look the same. It has to like why can't you do it? Or I could do it. Why
Yeah.
can't you do it? Because I'm not super tall. I'm 6'5", but like
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm like I can do it. Why can't you do it? And then I started bouncing around. I wasn't coaching O line. I went to coaching quarterbacks. I went to coaching this. Then when I came back to O line on that 2018 team that I worked for a different head coach, I'm like, that's when my eyes were open a little bit, and I'm like, okay, this kid can do this footwork. This kid can't. How can we get him to go where we need to? And
Mm-hmm.
that's another reason why I think O line's the hardest one to do because you have to watch 5 guys and then figure out why is it not looking right, and then figure out the one thing to change out of 5 guys. And that's why I talk to coaches all the time, and they're like, "Yeah, I need to find an O line coach." And I'm like, "Are there no O line coaches?" And they're like, "Well, it's the hardest thing to do because you got to watch all
Yeah.
5 guys at one time."
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Like I coached the tight ends when I was at Miami the last 2 years, and like just grading a scrimmage or grading a game. Like, we were an 11, sometimes 12 personnel team.
Mhm.
So you're grading one, two guys tops. Like, man, I would grade a game in like 45 minutes. It was awesome. You know what I mean? Now it takes me, I say now, now and before, having the line, I mean, it takes me 3 hours to grade a game because you
Right.
got to grade it stat and everything. So yeah, it is hard, but I think it's also probably one of the most rewarding, positions to
Yeah.
coach because you do get, it's such a developmental position, um, and it's such an unnatural thing for
Yes.
most guys to do properly. And let's face it, it's getting better, but I think historically it's one of the more poorly coached positions in high school, right? I mean, like I go through recruiting and I watch practices and you just hear guys just go block the guy, just go hit him, and it's like, well, that's not what coaching really. Um, I think it's getting a lot better than it has been historically. But it's still such and quite frankly, most guys that play offensive line early in their lives didn't want to play offensive line, right? They're hanging on to the dream of being a big running back or a tight end or a linebacker or even a D lineman. So most of the good players come to the position late,
Mhm.
right? They probably didn't play it in youth league. Like I know for me, like I only played 1 year of youth football because I was too heavy.
Yep.
Because down here it's well, it was at least back in the day. It was all based off of weight, not age.
Yep.
So you have a lot of kids that either didn't play or couldn't play youth football. So their best football still way ahead of them. So um, different than coaching DBs, different than coaching receivers. Where if you're fast, you're fast. And if you're fast as a freshman, you're going to probably fast as a senior too, right? You know what I mean? If you're explosive, you have great ball skills, that's not going to develop a whole lot more usually, throughout the course of your college career. But the skill at which you play, offensive line, and again, it's such a skilled position, and it's such a developmental position because you're also growing as well. It's probably the most rewarding because you have guys. I mean, like I mentioned that right tackle I had at Bryant that was an all conference kid as a senior, a big kid. His name was
Mhm.
Ben Lyons. I mean, when I first got there 3 years prior, I mean, it was almost. I mean, the kids would bust his balls. I mean, he couldn't like stay on his own 2 feet in a drill. He'd fall over. He'd go the wrong way. I mean, it was. I mean, he's a great kid, and he wanted to. He just his body wasn't there yet. He wasn't there yet in development. But to the kid's credit, he worked and worked and worked and worked, and by the time he was a senior, he was in our conference game. Um, and I think stories like that is why you keep coming to the job at the end of the day.
Mhm. Yeah. That kind of frustrates me when, like you said, when a coach goes, just go block somebody. So since I played, I'm like, I try to make sure that I may never have a college recruit O lineman, but I like talking to all you guys because then I know what's being said. Then I know how
Mm-hmm.
to coach it. And then maybe wherever I end up, if I take the terminology with me, even though I have my own, everybody's gonna have their own how they say things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like let's say one day I do. Like I thought I was going to. Last year we had a freshman that was 6'6", 290 pounds. And I'm like, ooh, maybe there's a college recruit one day. If he becomes a junior and he's still big, maybe. But he turned into a complete jerk, in school.
Mm,
So that's
yeah.
I know every time I tell a line coach we had that as a freshman, their eyebrows raise up. They're like, really? But then they're like, but then your guys' first question, what's he like in school? And I go, well, don't ask
Yeah,
me that.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
don't ask me that. Like yeah, like don't even bother. And that's an asshole move of me, but I'm not going to waste people's time. Like, don't even bother. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
um, but I know that if I coach him, not quite like college, but I say certain things and like I'm very technical and do those things, I think it helps you guys with recruiting or when you do get them, like they have somewhat of an idea
Hmm.
what's going on. Division 3 on, like it doesn't matter.
Oh
And
yeah.
so that's why I like talking to you guys because some people don't. They're like, well, I'm going to say my own thing. I'm going to be old school and say just block them. And I go, cool. Yeah, I want them to get blocked too. Don't think that I don't, but how are we going to get there? Like, what's the best way to do it? Um, am I helping them if they do get recruited one day? Or, I could talk to another O line coach and I tell them how I talk, and then they take it to their program and then they start doing it. It helps them. Like, I don't care. Like, how do I help college coaches out too one day if they come recruit them to make sure that
Hmm.
it's as painless as possible when they do get recruited?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think I think we're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to advance the game, right? You know what I mean? And help kids become better. And also do probably one of the hardest, maybe outside of hitting a baseball at the major leagues, probably the hardest thing to do in sports, right? You're going backwards, they're going forwards, they're better athletes than you are, and you got to stop them from getting to a point that you can't even see in some cases, right?
Right.
From a pass protection. Um, that's hard to do, man. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it was funny because like I was talking to a couple other line coaches at camps this summer and recruiting in spring. You see guys at practices or showcases or whatnot, and the topic of like O line trainers and training facilities and stuff came up. And it's funny because a couple guys I talked to were very opposed or very adamant in their opposition to the whole,
Mhm.
not quarterback, but training facility because there's a couple that are pretty predominant in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah.
It's becoming a little bit more predominant down in South Florida now. There's at least one guy I know that does a really good job. And I have a totally different take on it. Like to me, and I know like we spoke a little bit when I was on the podcast asking about like, multi-sport athletes and that kind of
Yes.
stuff. And to me, like the more you're being active and the more you're doing O-line things, the better. I don't care if I'm coaching you or if, Johnny, the trainer's coaching you. And even if they're coaching you to maybe do something a little bit different technically or a little bit, whatever, I don't care because at least you're doing something O-line related because so much of what we do is muscle memory. And even if your coaching points are a little bit different than mine, the muscle memory and the movement is still probably very, very, very similar.
Mhm.
And to me, the more of that they can do, I don't care whether it's guys who currently like there are some of my current players that when they go home for breaks, in May or spring break, whatever it is, they go back and work with a trainer,
Mhm.
once or twice, right? Um, and I'm completely fine with that. I don't even bat an eye about it. In fact, I'm happy they do it because I'd rather they do that than spend a week on the couch eating Cheetos and playing PlayStation, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? And quite frankly, in a lot of cases, I rather they do that than rather they do that than go play pickle basketball at the park because at least that's a controlled setting, right? Where there's
Mhm.
probably less chance of getting injured than rolling an ankle or breaking a leg, dunking a basketball, playing a pickle basketball game on the blackboard somewhere.
Right.
So yeah, I'm totally for it. It's funny, and it's funny. I actually think that I mentioned that like because I always compare like Ohio to South Florida because those are my two recruiters and where I've known the most. Um, I think it's a big reason why some of the line play, I think, for the higher level recruits in the Midwest is a little bit higher than some of the guys down south, especially in Florida, because like I can only name one, maybe two line, like O-line trainers in like the Tri-County area in South Florida
Hmm.
that are reputable, and even those have only been really come to the forefront the last probably 4 or 5 years, whereas that's been a thing in the Midwest for years now. Like kids have been allowed to play, regardless of weight, playing. So like, linemen start playing line earlier and they're trained, more technically and more refined. And that's why the line plays better, quite frankly, at the high school level, in most of the schools in the Midwest than it is down south. So to me, the more that they can do, the better.
Yeah, there's a high school near here. They have one in Illinois. It's an O line, D line train. It's called Fist Football in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about them is I've talked to them on here, and they're going to come do a joint practice with us. Their high school versus with our high school. What
Mm-hmm.
they'll do is if a kid comes to them and says, "I'm going to come here, I'm going to pay," they immediately say, "What high school do you go to?" They'll tell them, "Okay, who's your O line coach?" They'll reach out to that O line coach and say, "Hey, your kid's going to come here. What do you want them to work on?"
That's
Like,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. And he's like, "Do you run the wing T? Do you run the triple option? Are you a spread? Like, what do you do?" And then they'll have a conversation about what they do. And then they might say, okay, we may also do this, just adding more tools to their tool belt. And they'll
Mm-hmm.
communicate that with them. He's like, whatever you want. We're not here to say, hey, I'm a GT guy. We're always going to run GT and we're going to train them that. You may not run that play. So why am I
Sure.
teaching this?
Yeah.
So I love how they go about it. D line, they're like, okay, well, how do you teach it? What's your techniques? What kind of defense? So they do go above and beyond to make sure that they're getting what the coach wants. Then also they communicate with the coach saying, what do you think about working on this too? And so now, it's not the school paying, it's the parents, but still they're working on that stuff. And that's why
Sure.
I respect them. So I told them, hey, if I ever have a kid for me come to you guys, like you guys have a reputation now with that. So it's slowly growing. Like their thing is slowly growing, especially during COVID. They got to do it. Like during COVID, they were able
Sure.
to do it. And
Yeah.
so they got big. They've gone to California and worked with people just because of that little aspect that he's like, I'm surprised nobody thought of this. Like, why don't I just talk to the coach and see what they work on and just say, hey, they're gonna get a little extra work.
Yeah.
And it's out of their own pocket. You're not paying for it. And I'm gonna make sure that they're working on what you do. And I'm like,
I
that's a
think
great
it's
idea.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, that's obviously going above and beyond, and that's really really awesome on their part that they have that philosophy, and we're gonna not so much check in with, but like also have the current coach as a part of the process. But like I said, but even like even like signees, for example, like guys we sign in December or February, they aren't going to early enroll, so they have a whole semester and change back home before they enroll in the summer. Like we signed a kid that plays baseball. We signed a kid that played basketball. And there were one of the questions that those families asked, in the recruiting process: are you okay if I keep on playing baseball in the spring before I come in the summer, or can I play AU basketball? I'm like, absolutely, because if the option is you just sitting at home playing PlayStation and eating, hot Cheetos, then of course I'd rather you. And yes, is there a risk of injury? I get it, but quite frankly, hopefully we're not counting on you to be a starter for us anyways as a true freshman. All right. And again, the risk outweighs the reward outweighs the risk. The reward
Right.
of you being active, keeping up athletically, staying in great shape, not getting a bunch of bad weight, before you come on campus. That is way more important and way more beneficial than the slight risk you might roll an ankle or, throw your shoulder out or something like that.
Right. Um, how much has recruiting changed? I was thinking of that earlier. Like, do you guys still go after the same amount of high school kids, or is it like now you have to count for that transfer portal too? Like, you have to account for all of
Yeah, it is. It's hard. I, you know, I think if you ask that same question to 20 coaches, you probably get 20 different answers.
right.
So it has changed. It has. It's a heavy question. So I think the way that I'm trying to go about it here, and I have Coach Moorhead's support is, so I think in theory you want to try and say, okay, if we normally would sign 30 kids, right, 30 high school kids, now, on average, you're essentially cutting it in half. You're taking half high school kids, half portal kids. Now, that's not half down the middle per position, because
Mhm.
I think what we've learned, especially this year, because the portal changed dramatically this cycle because of the windows.
Hmm.
And really what that did is it really made it harder for schools like us on the offensive line. I
Hmm.
think there are certain positions, especially the offensive skill positions, running back, receiver, where you can get quality players in the portal regardless of what level you're at, as long as you want to look for them. You know,
Hmm.
um, but at offensive line, especially because even if you're a higher level Power Five school, you can recruit a kid that will be a starter for us, and you're recruiting for depth purposes.
Hmm.
And that kid's still going to get NIL money. That kid's still going to get, to say he plays at, Ohio State or, TCU or whatever. So it's a lot harder. And when the portal was kind of less in a window format, our first year, we had a lot more success because you could outwork people in the portal
Hmm.
if you just kind of if you were in it kind of day in day out. Where now, when a kid can only get in between December 1st and January 15th or whatever it was, um, even if Alabama, for example, wasn't in the market for an offensive lineman, but come January 10th they were, right. They could just go online and print out every kid in the portal, which you can't do for high schools necessarily, right? So I think for our position, it made it more challenging than honestly than we probably were expecting. So I think we want to get to a point where we sign a full number of high school offensive linemen in every recruiting class. So what is that number? Well, between 3 and 4, probably, depending on the year. You know what I mean? That's
Right.
kind of your average. And then really probably only go into the portal when there's an immediate need and or you lose guys to the
Uh,
portal, right? So for example, like, hey, we have, you know, um, 14, 15 guys on scholarship and 3 are graduating seniors, so we're going to replace those 3 with 3 high school kids. But in December, one of our sophomores tells us he's going to go in the portal because he's homesick or wants to go play somewhere, whatever. So now instead of replacing that number with a 4th high school kid, probably go try and find the best transfer you can find to kind of fill that hole, um, in your depth. So I think that's the end goal for us in the offensive line and what we want to get to.
uh,
But I think every year is different, so you have your best laid plans, but you got to kind of roll the punches a little bit, So like this year, we were really, really active. So what we did was we signed a full high school class of 3 offensive linemen, one from Ohio, one from Texas, one from Florida, which is normal. And then we also signed 4 transfers. Now, that's a lot. That's a
uh,
lot. And they're scattered. One's a grad transfer with 1 year, one's a grad transfer with 2 years remaining, and then 2 are undergrad transfers with 3 and 4 years remaining. So it really kind of scattered them around. They're all 4 in different classes,
right.
and that was not necessarily by design, but it worked out well that way, quite frankly. Because it helped keep our numbers kind of spaced out equally across the depth.
Right.
Um, Part of why we went so heavy into the portal was because we lost really well, we lost 4 guys to the portal from our team last year, uh, 3 of which it was a mutual kind of discussion. Hey, like, we don't really see you playing here, but we're happy to see you go somewhere else. We'll help you out. And those guys actually ended up finding homes that were, from a optics standpoint, better than Akron,
Hmm.
bigger conferences or whatnot. Um, and then we had one returning starter who was going to graduate and just was from Texas. He's engaged. Fiance is in Texas. His whole life's in Texas. And he just felt like he wanted to be closer to home, which I perfectly understand. He was really the only offensive player that we lost into the portal that we didn't want to lose, quite frankly. As a returning starting offensive lineman. But you understand why the respect decision, based off his criteria. So
Right.
because of losing all those guys, we had to, we can't replace them all with freshmen, obviously, right? You know what I mean? So we were very, very active in the portal, and we got some good players out of it. Some are going to help us immediately, some are going to help us down the road. But to sign for a school of our level to find, identify, and sign for transfer portal offensive linemen is hard. And
Yeah.
I think by the end of it, most of the guys on staff saw the way it wore on me, especially because it'd be one thing if you were just like, not really active and kind of passive as a recruiter. That's not who I am at all.
Hmm.
And so I chased everything. It felt like you were like third and goal from the 1 yard line from like January all the way until the last kid said yes and at the middle of May.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so that was how this year worked. Hopefully next year is different because next year hopefully we retain better. You know what I mean? And only have to go out there maybe your regular high school signees and maybe one transfer or something.
So you earned that vacation to Mexico, is what happened.
Oh boy, you have no idea, no idea.
Is that kind of
But
like,
I think,
no, go ahead.
but I think, I think that's a very like talking to other G5 offensive line coaches through the spring and summer like that's just kind of your existence now, right? I mean, you're constantly going to be looking to replace because, quite frankly, your best players are going to probably I don't say constant, but your best players are going to some are going to leave, right, for better opportunities. That's is what it is, right? And but the supply of quality players on the offensive line in the portal is not really high,
Hmm.
and demand is really really high. So the market's out of whack, right? Which is actually the opposite with the high school, right? Like the supply of high school seniors playing college football or high school football has not gone down,
Uh-huh.
but demand has gone way down. So like we're actually able to find better high school options than we ever have before. We're just taking less of them,
Right.
which is kind of crazy.
Well, that comes back full circle what this whole thing's been about. We didn't even get to X's and O's. I'm more curious about everything else.
Yeah,
But it goes back full circle on like we were talking about getting those kids to buy into what you're doing. If they're there, if they're a junior coming in, you got to quickly get them on board. But like you said, if you get other kids involved, because it's not the old school way where they come in as a freshman and they're built up to juniors or so, and they already know. Now, if you're getting guys coming in and out, it's how do you get them to buy in? How do you get them to understand what's going on? But if you have guys around them that know it, then it's an easier transition. Because I keep thinking of, because I feel bad for you guys. I keep reading things on this portal. I'm like, oh, these poor. I think of the coaches. I'm like, these poor coaches.
yeah, yeah,
Like, because I think of it differently than everybody else. Everybody else looks at it as a fan. And I'm like, no, think about these coaches that are constantly like, oh, this guy left. Now I got to do this. And then all of a sudden, right underneath your feet, well, this guy left now. I got to do this. Like,
yeah.
constant.
It's a I mean it's not ideal, obviously, but it's Pandora's box is open, and that you can't put it back in, So, um, you know, I think what it does it forces us as coaches to do a couple things better.
Hmm.
Number one, you have to build not a culture, but just an environment
Yes.
where kids want to a come and b stay,
Yep.
right? And even if you do that, like even if we build the best environment possible at Akron and we're winning and coaches is awesome and guys like being around each other, which we're getting there. But even if you do all that and Ohio State comes in and says, "Hey, we want to pluck, this your left guard or your quarterback or your defensive end or whatever," and even if you do all that, most kids are still going to leave for that opportunity. But quite frankly, that opportunity does not come for as many kids as it's making it out to be. A
Right.
lot of kids are leaving just because, I'm not getting love, or so you have to be very, very frank and very honest with kids and be very honest and constant in your communication and your expectations. Like I, I think I do a good job. I could do a better job, but I pride myself on communication with guys based off of their roles. Hey,
Hmm.
listen, like you're not a starter, but you're a rotational guy, so you can expect to play 2 or 3 series a half, right? And we rotate guys, right? We try to play 8, 9, 10 guys a game when we can, depending on how many guys have earned it, right? Hey, you're not there yet. You're a scouting guy right now, but like I mentioned, that left tackle that started the last couple games for us, and he was a scouting guy for the first 5 games of the season. he didn't even get a rep up on the main field, right? And then eventually we brought him up and rotated and maybe get him a starter, you know. So clear expectations of, where you are, and how can you get better from your current role, I think it's, and that can just happen in training camp. That happens throughout the course of the season, right? Because expectation, the worst thing you want to do is for a kid to think, okay, I'm not a starter, but I'm going to play 25 plays a game, right? You go to the kid's hometown, there's 20, high school teammates and family members in the stands, and the kid doesn't play. And
Right.
now, parents are pissed off. That projects on the kid. Kid's pissed off. That projects on you. And then the whole thing falls apart. Now, if that kid knows he's not going to play according to the game, and quite frankly, he's probably going to be as adamant about getting as many people to come to the game, quite frankly, right? So it's all about communication. So it makes that more important on our end. Number one. Number two, from a recruiting standpoint, I think I kind of referenced this a little bit when we talked last time. It makes it more incumbent upon you to do as much homework as you possibly can and background on what you're bringing into your program, because you don't want to recruit your own problems, obviously, right? And that is so much harder to do with transfers than with high school guys right now because of the windows, right? Like a guy goes in the portal on January 12th, and your school starts January 15th, and you got to get him enrolled in school, and he fits a need athletically. How fast can you do background and talk to his high school coach? We got to coach them at the last school. Do you have someone that you can talk to on the last staff that will give you honest answers and not just tell you, yeah, he's a good kid or whatever, or he's not. And maybe it's not the line coach. Maybe it's the defensive GA that works with the scouts, and maybe it's the strength coach. Maybe. So like literally like if there's a kid that we want to recruit out of the portal, it goes into our whole staff chat. Like our recruitment guys, our operations people, our recruiting staff, our strength staff. Hey, does anyone know anybody at whatever Washington State University, because there's a kid that that fits a need, but we don't want to take a turd. And then our QC may say, oh yeah, I know the GA there. Let me hit, or the strength coach. Oh yeah, I know their strength coaches. So it's truly a team effort, but it is speed dating. These processes get put into a microwave, and you're recruiting, signing, visiting guys all within a very short, condensed, kind of stretched out window, as opposed to in high school, you have a whole year cycle. Visit a kid in the spring, watch him play, talk to his coaches, watch a couple game films, watch him practice, watch him play basketball. That's not happening with transfer guys. So it does put a lot more onus on doing your homework and not trying to bring and not trying to keep your own problems. So you don't want to recruit somebody who's running from competition or running from a problem, right?
Right.
You want to recruit somebody that's looking for a greener path. It's like in general, I have a general rule of thumb for me for linemen. I don't want to recruit a kid who's going into the portal after less than 3 semesters at the school. To me, you got 3 semesters. You had a coaching change. My role's not what I wanted to be. I tried. At least you put forth some effort and tried, paid your dues, and it's not going to work out. Now, I say that we did sign one kid in this cycle, but only spent 2 semesters at his last school. But that kid I recruited at a high school for the whole process. Knew the family, knew the kid really well. Like, there's a lot of history there.
Right.
So that's a little bit different scenario. But yeah, it's when you're as active in the portal as you have to be at the G5 level, which let's face it, you have it's going to put a lot of pressure on you to do a lot of homework and make sure you're not bringing in guys who don't want to be around your program. And we haven't had a ton of those issues so far. Thank God, knock on wood.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll be honest with you, if I sat here and told you that we batted 1,000 so far on every kid we brought into our program, both high school and transfers in the last 2 cycles, they're all great players and all great kids and all don't bring any baggage, I'd be lying to you.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal is to minimize that as much as possible.
Like I said, you earned that Mexico trip and you probably earned a pay raise. You better go to coach and be like, hey, now.
Well, we'll see how the year pans out before we get to that point.
Yeah, if you make a bowl game, be like, okay, look, I get a
Oh
pay.
yeah, well yeah. I think if you get to that point, then I think everyone's probably in line for a nice little nice little Christmas bonus or something.
Well, I'm just doing for you what I do at the high school. I'm the social media guy now for the football thing. So I'm like, where's my stipend? Where's my social?
Nice.
Because I have to take
Yeah,
pictures of
definitely.
everything and post on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Because I took it upon myself. I was the idiot. I was like, hey, this is the new world we live in. We got to get on social media. So I'm
Oh
doing
yeah.
it. I'm trying to figure out how to edit stuff, and I'm an idiot. And so I don't coach defense. So as soon as defense is going, I'm taking pictures, I'm filming, and I'm like, where's my stipend? I went, where's the athletic director at? I need a raise because this is an extra job.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's funny, not to go off on a sidebar, but that's one of the things. So I'll give an example. We hired a new, I mentioned that I had a GA the last 2 years that was awesome.
Yeah.
Rob Delaney, he's now in a support role um, as a QC with Notre Dame, which is huge for him. He's a kid from Chicago, I imagine.
Mhm.
Catholic high school in Chicago, now he's associate at Notre Dame. So we interviewed a couple of candidates to replace him, and we hired a young man named Zach Woodkey, who had been a student assistant and like an intern at Ohio State. ROC, Billy Fessler was at Ohio State, and they kind of worked together a little bit. So he became obviously highly recommended. And when I heard that, my immediate concern was, oh, I'm not sure if I want to hire a guy coming from Ohio State because that's a not that it's a great program. Obviously, Coach Day, those guys have done a hell of a job, but it's one of those programs where you have a support staff of 100 people, right? So everyone's got a very, very small piece of the pie, and it's all they kind of deal with, right? But when I talked to Zach and I did some research on his background, he worked in recruiting, he worked in video, he worked in, he worked with the kicking game, helped out an analyst or whatever with the kickoff return units and whatnot.
Mhm.
So when I saw that and then I talked to him, I said, listen, I said, this is, being a GA at the G5 level, same as even being a full timer at the FCS level, like part of the great thing about it, but also part of the pain in the ass about it is that you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
So like for example, like when you're the GA at Akron, like you're not just going to work with me. Like you're going to be doing drawings for the whole offense. You're going to be doing recruiting, making runs to the airport because we don't have a full recruiting staff. You're going to be doing edits, sometimes on Photoshop or whatever because we need help with that. We're going to be doing like so. You're going to wear a lot of hats. You're going to have to set up videos sometimes. Put in the data. So yeah, we have like the bare bones of all those departments, but not as robust as Ohio State or Michigan or whatnot. Um, so A, are you okay with that? Yes, okay. And B, like that's going to help you because when you do go get your next job, hopefully pretty soon, it's not going to be well. I only know how to do this. You'll be qualified for not just being your line GA at your next job, but also being a skills GA, a teams GA, a recruiting or whatever. So I think coaches at our level, I say our level, not the non P5 level, probably have a lot more in common with that
Mhm.
with the high school experience than the Power Five because you do have to be able to do a lot more, wear a lot more hats on a given day, right? Like you're the football coach, but you're also like the assistant, academic coordinator. you're
Yeah.
you're helping, you're helping with class checks, you're helping with what's going on with study hall, you're helping with the shrink staff sometimes breaking up stuff and setting stuff up for workouts, which would never happen, if you're coaching or in a coaching role, at Illinois or at Nebraska or whatever.
Right.
So it's good and bad.
Well, and we're also therapists. These kids will come to you with all their problems,
Oh
and all
yeah,
of a sudden you're a psychologist therapist, and you're like, well, why don't you go talk to the counselor? Well, I don't want to. I want to talk to you. Okay.
yeah.
And then I have to tell them I'm not qualified to fix this problem. I'm going to try. Then they tell you the problem, and you're like, oh hell no. Like I don't know. Like
The funny, it's really funny you say that. A really good buddy of mine, Mike Zuckerman, is the linebackers coach at Utah State. And Zuck's really, really good, really, really good. But he had been at Miami for like 10 years, essentially. He was a student assistant that became a GA. They became a QC, and an analyst, and a senior analyst. So he had like pretty much every support staff job he could have, on the coaching side at Miami before he got his first full time job at Utah State a couple years ago. Um, and I talked to him. I think it was after the first spring. It was like within his first year. And I asked him, I said, hey, what's been the biggest surprise or the biggest thing you I want to prepare for? And him and I spoke a ton when he was at Miami because I've been a full time before he had not been. So we talked about the differences between that and kind of what to expect. And the one thing he said was, I was not prepared for how much counseling, how much psychotherapy,
Yes.
came with the job. Is like, because when you're the GA, the QC, you're the fun coach, right? You're the young guy. You're the one that sets up drills and can talk to them and can, dap them on the sidelines, and that kind of stuff. But they don't come to you when, grandma's sick in the hospital or when they got the girlfriend pregnant or when they're upset with playing time. They don't come to you for that. And I'm like, yeah, that's. I mean, there probably should be some kind of a mental health or mental counseling component to the job going forward because it's becoming more and more of that for sure.
Oh yeah, and then in one of my offices at the school, we do have this couch, looks like a therapy couch. So sometimes like, oh, just go sit on there. I'll be there in a second. Like just relax. Or like the best is when they come to me and they say, hey, I got to study for a test. Can you help me? And they come in, they're taking like algebra, geometry, and I'm looking at it going, well, I'm an idiot. I don't know what the hell you're doing. I don't know what this is, but I'm going to try. And then you try to help them and you go, this is why I didn't teach math or go into math or whatever. And they're like, oh, come on. I'm like, go to a tutor, but they don't trust them. Like, we trust you as a coach. And I'm like, well, there's a reason why I'm coaching and not math. Like, there's a reason I'm not doing this for you, but they do. They'll come to you for everything.
Yeah, they do, and it's usually a good thing because it means they trust you, obviously. But it's really hard for them sometimes to. It's really hard for your other support staff members sometimes. I feel to earn their trust the same way we do because I think
Yeah.
it's because we demand it probably so much more.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, we all kind of joke, if football coaches ran the world, we'd be so much more efficient, right?
Hmm.
I think sometimes they don't trust or don't see the immediacy with the results of the trainers or the support staff, whatever, as much as with us because it's not what they do for a living, it's what we do for a living.
That is true. And they do see us more, I guess.
Yeah,
They see you every
yeah,
day. Or especially for me, if I'm in the hallway, they'll see you. Or for me, even I coach basketball too, so they'll see me for another sport. So it's like, oh,
mm-hmm.
I'm always around. I told them that too. I'm like,
Sure,
you'll never get rid of me. I'm always.
yeah, and especially if you're always the same person when you're around, and that really really earns their respect and trust because it's consistency over time. At the end of the day, trust is this consistency over time. That's all it is, right? And that's I think what a lot of people miss out on sometimes.
Yeah, I do the best I can with that, and I become more truthful. And they hate that, but then I think they also respect it sometimes. Like it's hard to hear, and they'll get mad at you, and then they'll come back to you the next day and still talk to you. And I'm like, well, this guy's gonna tell me the truth, and it's gonna be hard to hear. And I told parents that like I'm gonna tell you the truth, and it's gonna
Oh
hurt.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's also part of what you know the buck stops with you when you're the coordinator or the full time coach as opposed to the GA or the QC or the whatever. I tell you a funny story about that. When I was at Bryant, so Bryant was an FCS school that was essentially still operating like a D2 operation when we got there. So I forgot how many full time coaches we had, but essentially I was the line coach, but I was also technically in charge of running backs and tight ends. We had a tight ends coach and a running backs coach that were like local, like high school teachers,
Uh-huh.
and they would come over in the afternoons. They'd be there for like the last half of meetings and then for practice. So really, they weren't there for the game plan; they weren't there for practice prep. So it was hard. I mean, really, it's a hard job for those guys because they're kind of walking in almost like kind of like half cocked sometimes. You know what I mean?
Right.
And not know what's going on. So I did not envy that. But my point is, so because of that, like extra interviews and like that, end of the year stuff like for backs and tight ends and no line all kind of fell on me. We had a tight end my second year there, I think it was named Matt Tracy. And Matt's like a really successful real estate person now, lives in Colorado. He's got married kids and he's kicking ass in life. And Matt was coming up, he was I think a sophomore or junior, and he was like all conference like second team that year. But he was really a pass catching tight end. And we were a two back power offense. So obviously the two things didn't always go hand in hand, right? He was a matchup nightmare. He could run, he had really good ball skills. And in that conference, in the Northeast Conference, I think he was really hard to cover. But he was a huge liability running for us.
Mhm.
Was a really poor inline blocker. and was really at times almost unwilling as an offline blocker. So we have our end of the year meeting. And we were like 7-4, had a good year, competed for the conference championship. But he comes in the meeting kind of lighthearted and was expecting me to tell him how great he was, I think. And I told him, listen, that's great that you're a great pass catcher and stuff. And I'm not going to harp on that. I mean, when you meet with the head coach, he'll go over that. But I'm talking as a blocker. It's like, we got the game plan around you and plan on you screwing it up. Like, you're a really piss poor blocker, and you are a liability for us in our offense. Because, we're a 21, 12, 13 personnel, gap scheme offense, and you're not that.
Right.
And so he was actually taken aback by it. And I think, to your point, I think he was a little offended
Mm-hmm.
and didn't like it and didn't take it right. And I was like, I'm not telling you I like it. I'm just telling you how I see it. Numbers don't lie.
Mm-hmm.
Put on tape and watch the film. I don't care how many passes you caught, whatever. So, you know, if we're third and 13 every third down, don't matter how many passes you catch, right? We're winning games. And to the kid's credit, I think because he was so competitive and wanted to be wrong, wanted to prove that he could do it.
Right.
He got bigger, he got stronger, had a great offseason, and came back the next year. He was never like a dominant blocker, but he became a much more functional, like a non-liability in the run game later on in his career. And to this day, he'll DM me on Twitter or on Instagram or text me like a picture of him, like, blocking somebody or whatever from, like, because Brian will post like some old pictures or whatever. He'll be like, see, great blocker, right? Like almost like poking my nose in, which I love because he did become a serviceable blocker, and it may not have happened if it wasn't for that meeting.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I tell kids too. Like, if I tell them the truth and it hurts, and I go, "Hey, but I want you to prove me wrong," like, and I want you to come up to me and tell me you proved me wrong. And guess what? I'm going to shake your hand. Like, it's not personal. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
it's not personal. And I want you to do well. I want you to prove me wrong. And when you do, come tell me, and I'm going to say, "Congratulations, you're doing way better than I thought, or you're doing better than me." Like, I want you to do better than me. And
100%.
everything I tell them, I want you to have a house, money, pool. I want the nice car. Invite Coach Steve over to the pool sometimes, like, you know. And when you do prove me wrong, because I've told kids, like, I don't know if you're going to make it in life the way you act. I've straight up said that to kids, like, the way you act in
Mm-hmm.
school, the way you will not make it in life. Something's bad's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. And if you prove me wrong, I want you to send me a message and say, "Look, I have this job. I did this. You're wrong." And I'm going to say, "That's awesome. That's awesome."
I was very, very fortunate from 2016 to 2018, I worked for Mark Richt at Miami.
Uh-huh.
And it's funny because, Mark is completely as advertised, a man of God, doesn't cuss, doesn't raise his voice very often. I mean, everything we read here about Mark Richt is completely true. Like, he is one of probably the only people I've ever worked with in this profession who is, what some would consider a quote unquote Bible thumper,
Mm-hmm.
very religious, very spiritual, but literally walks the walk and talks the talk.
Mm-hmm.
He lives that. I mean, he is 100% lives what he preaches. So my point is, when I worked with Mark those years in Miami, he was in the process of trying to clean up Miami's program. There was some cultural things that had to get fixed. There was a little bit of lack of discipline in the program, those kind of things. And I actually didn't think Mark was the right person for the job, being an alum, because I saw, this kind of like God Squad kind of, maybe being too nice to
Uh-huh.
these kids who were going to take advantage of them. And I was completely wrong. He had a phenomenal ability to hold kids accountable, to be disciplined, without dog cussing them or without, demeaning them or whatnot. And quite frankly, he actually kicked a few kids off the team that needed it, and in those meetings when he did it with the parents and the kids, he was great because he would say, listen, I'm hoping, and I can give you a list of names of guys at Georgia, guys at Florida State when I coached as an assistant that got kicked off the team for, immature, dumb, repeated things, whatnot, but then use it as a learning tool, and were able to kind of get their lives back in order, and are now being hyper successful, either playing at other school in the NFL or in life. And I get messages all the time from guys saying, "Coach, thank you so much for booting me from Georgia because If it wasn't for that, I would never have, been able to like learn what I learn now. Now I'm a great husband, I'm a great father, I'm working this job, or I'm in the NFL, whatever it is. And it's true. I mean, like there's guys that there's some guys who grew up and never learned, unfortunately. There's a handful of guys that either you threaten them with it and they shaped up and become really, really good, citizens and good players, or they went somewhere else and got their lives in order and are killing it, at those places now.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, to your point. Hello.
Yeah, you're still there.
Oh, sorry. That's right. So yeah, so I mean, it's. I think that's sometimes, like we say, sometimes you got to be honest and almost brutally honest. Sometimes the honesty it means you got to go somewhere else, and that's
Yeah.
okay sometimes.
Yeah. Well, Coach, I realize how long I had you on here. I appreciate you coming on here. Sorry there was no X's and O's, but I love talking everything else because X's and O's are all the same. I like talking everything else in between.
I think I think that's the nose are overrated. Anyways, I think sometimes you won't well not sometimes all the time. You win with people, not with plays. So I think you're onto it.
Well, Coach, I appreciate you. You earned all the vacation time in the world, in my opinion. Um, good luck this season again if I don't talk to you beforehand. But thanks for coming back on the podcast. And I'll put your Twitter and everything for everybody else to follow. And everybody watch Akron this year. I think they might win some more games this year, I think.
We definitely will. Thank you so much, but I really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you so much.